Kính chào các quý vị đại biểu.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nguyễn Thu Thủy, currently with the Temasek project and member of the Hub project operated by CCSB-VN. We warmly welcome all of you to today's webinar on health governance to promote comprehensive LCA of materials for sustainable construction in Vietnam. This is the fourth webinar organized by CCSB-VN, funded by KAS in Vietnam. Allow me to explain some housekeeping rules. We provide simultaneous translation. You use the globe symbol down in the right corner, and you can always send us your comment and question via the chat box. During the discussion, you can use the hand raising symbol, and then we can allow you to unmute yourself. In order to ensure the quality of sound, may I remind you to turn off your microphone when you are not speaking, and please stick to the time allocated to you. Now, may I give you an introduction of the agenda. We will run from 2 to 4:45 p.m. Vietnamese time. First, we will have the opening remarks by the organizing committee and sponsor, followed by presentation sessions. And finally, we have the panel discussion and Q&A session as well. Now, may I introduce the participants from the sponsor, Madam Vũ Thu Phương, Program Manager from the KAS Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Vietnam. From our expert, Professor Lê Trung Thành, President of Vietnam Institute for Building Materials, Madam Phan Thu Hằng, Chair of the Vietnam Green Building Council, Mr. Bruno Fax, INSEE EcoCycle Siam City Cement Vietnam, Mr. Nguyễn Huy Khanh, former Vice Chairman of Vietnam's VNCC Vietnam Corporation for Construction and Consultancy. According to agenda, we have Dr. Joan Krasik, CEO of DGNB. Unfortunately, he has an unexpected meeting, and for that reason, he sent us his presentation in a video clip. From HUSE, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Director, International Cooperation, Dr. Phạm Hải Hà, Head of Department of Architecture and Environment, Professor Nguyễn Văn Tuấn, Director of CCSB-VN. We also welcome lecturers, technical staff from CCSB-VN, and staff from International Cooperation Department of HUSE. From our advisor team, Dr. Michael Weiber, Senior Advisor of the Hope Project. And we're also pleased to welcome experts, practitioners from different state agencies, enterprises, institutes, and architects and engineers who are working in Vietnam. Many of you have joined us before. Now, may I invite Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Director of International Cooperation of HUSE, to have the opening speech. Can you hear me? Dear Madam Vũ Thu Phương, from Program Manager CAS in Vietnam, Dr. Michael Weibel, Senior Advisor of the Hope Project, and distinguished guests and representative from different agencies. First, on behalf of the organizing committee from HUSE, we're pleased to welcome you to the webinar Health Governance to Promote Comprehensive Life Cycle Assessment of Materials in Regard of Sustainable Construction in Vietnam. This is the fourth webinar of the HOPE project this year, focusing on health-oriented policies and sustainable building practices to promote green urban governance in Vietnam. Construction consumes an enormous amount of fuel and natural resources with substantial impact on people's health. The more resources we consume, the larger the impact on humans' lives, and the impact runs from the moment we extract the fuel and natural resources until the end of the life cycle of the materials. And for that reason, a comprehensive LCAs of materials is important in order to promote sustainable architecture and design. This is a big responsibility for engineers and architects who are designing buildings in Vietnam and in the world towards sustainability. So this tool will help us minimize the consumptions of non-renewable resources and to ensure that we can minimize the impact of construction on the environment. And this tool also creates a healthy, non-toxic environment, a quality living environment, and also building environment in urban context. The HOPE project has been developed as a collaboration between KAS Hamburg University and HUSE in Hanoi to develop a health-oriented policy and sustainable building practices to promote well-being and green urban governance in Vietnam. The project is being managed by CCSB-VN based at Husei. We established the center with the aim that the center will become a forum to provide interdisciplinary knowledge to managers, policymakers, enterprises, and the public. The whole project is funded by the KAS with a durations of 3 years until 2024. We want to send our thanks to representative from the KAS, which is represented by Vũ Thu Phương here. Thank you for entrusting CCSB-VN with running this project. I hope that the HOPE project at CCSB-VN will be a forum for experts to share knowledge and experiences to promote well-being and green urban governance in Vietnam. Thank you, and I wish you good health and success. My thanks to Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng for the opening speech. Now may I invite Madame Vũ Thu Phương, Program Manager of KAS, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Thank you, Truy. Dear Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Director International Cooperation, dear speakers and commentators, dear the project team from HUSE, and also the technical advisor from Hamburg University. I can't believe we already reached the final webinar in the first year of cooperation. This year, CAS Vietnam cooperates with HUSE and Hamburg University launched a 3-year project to disseminate knowledge and facilitate actions amongst policymakers and experts in the field of health-oriented policies and sustainable building practices to promote a green urban governance in Vietnam. So until today, we cover almost 90% of our workload in the first year. This is the fourth webinars, and all the topics of our webinars have received substantial interest from the public. So we implemented a summary, and we learned that in the third webinar, we had a total of 400 participants, and today we also have more than 200 participants, which show that the project and its topics of the webinars has been a theme of great interest to the community, not only builders and designers and architects. For many of you, many of you may be unfamiliar with CAS. Then allow me to say a few things. CAS is a political organization, political foundation in Germany. We're particularly interested in environment and innovation, apart from our pillar, which is security and foreign policy. This year, apart from Hussein, we have two new partners from Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, and we're also interested in innovation and circular economy. So within those pillars, we implement a series of field visits to local areas, and we learned that for example, when we visited waste processing factories in Vietnam, we learned that solid waste from building materials are posing serious challenges to waste processing facilities in Vietnam. At the moment, landfilling is perhaps the only option, which have serious impact on soil and water, and it has been very slow to sort out the waste for recycling. So a big question is how can we change to environmentally friendly materials right from the beginning. Now back to the webinar today. I understand that so you always have to prioritize the duration of the construction of buildings, and for that reason sometimes you are reluctant to use materials such as wood or bamboo, which are not so durable, and we totally understand the challenges that you have to deal with over the years. And so we know that in the world and in Vietnam, we and in particular designers and architects are trying to introduce a lighter and more friendly materials to foster green buildings and sustainable development. As you know, all countries in the world are encouraging circular economy with innovation being the facilitating factor. And with those moves, I firmly believe that we can transform our modes of production and consumptions towards new forms of development, production, and consumptions that are smarter, more sustainable, and more environmentally friendly. And we also believe that university plays an important role to equip future architects and engineers with the essential knowledge about how to facilitate circular economy. So for CAS Vietnam, we cannot find a better partner than who say the institution which train thousands of leading architects and engineers in Vietnam. And today, thanks to Husay and CCSB-VN and the technical advisors from Hamburg University, we have another opportunity, the last one in the first year of our cooperation. And we hope that today we will have another productive discussion. I look at the screen and I see very distinguished speakers both from Vietnam and the world, and I believe that the discussion that you will contribute will make a substantial impact towards the facilitation of green development in Vietnam. On behalf of CAS Vietnam, I wish to sincerely thank Husay and CCSB-VN, and in particular the technical advisors from Hamburg University, Michael Weibel and Nguyễn Thu Thủy. So I know that you have done a lot, not just not just technical advice, that you have done a lot to the project. I also want to thank speakers and all participants. I know that many of you have been with us from the beginning, and we look forward to welcoming you back in the coming years. We wish you a productive and fascinating webinars, and we hope that we can contribute something to Vietnam and to the project. My thanks to Vũ Thu Phương from CAS for the opening speech representing the sponsor, and I thank you for your personal support to the implementation of this project. Now, may I invite Dr. Michael Weibel, Senior Technical Advisor of the Hub Project, to give a presentation, please.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, from my side. I'm very happy to take part in the final webinar today. Actually, I'm at the airport now. I will travel to Asia in a few hours. I'm very much looking forward to be back in Vietnam very soon as well. Please move on to the next slide, please. So why we did HOPE? We want to combine the dimension of health with the dimension of urban sustainability. And this came to our mind evidently because of the global corona pandemic. So we find and are of the firm opinion that a healthy living environment is really essential to provide a good quality of life for urban citizens. And in the end, everyone wants to have a good quality of life. To discuss the challenges to achieve this is a distinctive aim of the HOPE project. And I'm very happy that in the past webinars we have had so many good discussions bringing together the dimension of urban planning and health. Please, the next slide. We have had the 4 webinars. Today, we deal with health governance to promote comprehensive life cycle assessment of materials to promote sustainable building in Vietnam. Building materials, most of you maybe are not aware, are really essential to have and to promote sustainability. Next slide, please. If you look at the building material of concrete, a recent global report from the German Council for Sustainable Development, Humanity on the Move, Unlocking the Transformative Power of Cities, found out that there is a huge use of concrete in the world. In China alone, within 3 years, between 2011 and 2013, more concrete has been produced and used compared to the United States in 100 years. And the biggest component of concrete evidently is cement, and cement worldwide is contributing alone about 10% of global carbon emissions. So we have to find and identify ways to minimize sustainability, to maximize sustainability of these building materials and to minimize impact of building materials in terms of construction. And life cycle approach is one key element to that. Next slide, please. This is even more important because in 2020, we have reached a tipping point. For the first time ever on our planet, the global human mass exceeds all living biomass. So what we have constructed by building materials now is heavier than all the biomass on the planet. And this really should be a point to think more strongly to reinforce our efforts to promote sustainability in the construction sector. Next slide, please. This is also one reason why we founded the Competence Center for Sustainable Building in Vietnam at Hanoi University of Civil Engineering. This center means to bundle multi- and transdisciplinary expertise of sustainable building knowledge in Vietnam. And more importantly, to transfer this knowledge, this innovative knowledge, to the diverse areas of scientific application and to the general public. So we serve as a science society interface. That's very important. And that makes CCSB-VN a key stakeholder in the future sustainable building practice in Vietnam. So by means of this cross-cutting institution, we would like to overcome silo confinements and to develop CCSB-VN as Vietnam's not only leading think, but also as a leading do tank in terms of sustainable building in Vietnam. And I'm very happy that my colleagues from Hanoi University of Civil Engineering have initiated this project HOPE, which is the kicking point of CCSB-VN. Thanks at this point again for the generous funding by Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, thanks. That's my short input. I wish this HOPE seminar a very good course and looking very forward to the exciting presentations. Thanks so much.
Xin cảm ơn tiến sĩ Michael Weibel.
My thanks to Dr. Michael Weibel for giving us an overview of the HOPE project and the rationales behind this effort. Now, let's move to the presentation session. We will have the first presentation by Dr. Johannes Kreisig, CEO of German Sustainable Building Council, or DGNB. He cannot join us in person, but he sent us his presentation in a video clip format. Dr. Johannes Kreisig, for your information, CEO of the German Sustainable Building Council and a member of the board of directors of the World Green Building Council. He has been very active in mobilizing DGNB members to facilitate a transfer to green buildings and healthy building practices. Now allow me to introduce Dr. Crisis presentation for you. You can also send your question to him in our chat box.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the HOPE webinar number 4. My name is Johannes Kreisig, and I will present a seminar about life cycle assessment as an instrument of European and German policy to accelerate the transition towards a healthy and sustainable built environment. I implement the planning, construction, and operation of sustainable buildings and neighborhoods as the new normal for the built environment, for the entire built environment. This is very important. It's not a question for some lighthouse.
Xin lỗi quý vị, không biết có nên bật lại một chút.
To achieve this vision, we are using instruments, and the most important instrument is our network. It's a network of more than 1,900 member organizations, and these members are working together. We bring them together in networking events, but also initiatives like Klimapositive Städte und Gemeinden, which is for cities, and the Phase Sustainability, Phase Nachhaltigkeit for architects are important networks. The aim is to collaborate and to create public awareness. Second instrument, maybe of same importance, is to make sustainability measurable. If you can measure it, you can influence it. And for that, we have developed the DGNB certification scheme for sustainable buildings. A catalog of many criteria and indicators is drafted and used there. And now the advantage is that an investor can order a sustainable building with a defined quality, and everybody in the supply chain knows what to do and what's sustainability in this context. More than 9,000 certificates are awarded up to now. Certification is an important instrument for quality assurance in this context. Last but not least, it's about knowledge, to consolidate and spread the knowledge. For that reason, we have started the DGNB Academy to train experts for the market. If there are no experts, nothing will happen on the market. To support this, we are also working together with partner universities. More than 80 partner universities are in the network up to now. And this is not only in Germany, because sustainability is not a German issue, it's a global issue. But today I want to talk about EU policy and how this is influencing and promoting healthy and sustainable urban environments. A whole bunch of policies are defined and published by the European Commission. And in this context, they look for a strategy and instruments to support a sustainable built environment. One of the older ones is definitely the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. It's the core directive defining in each member state. So it's each member state is responsible to bring it into law. It's defining what's the required performance for new builds in Europe. And there's a strategy behind to have almost zero energy buildings by law. This EPBD is important because it's defining future quality of the building stock. But beside that, there are regulations like the construction product regulation defining which products are allowed to bring in the market. So this is a directive for the market. There's one single market for construction product in Europe, and therefore there's a European regulation required for that. Construction product regulation is not only defining the performance and or addressing the performance and also environmental issues of construction product. It is also a basis for standardization on this level. A new circular economy action plan for cleaner and more competitive Europe is drafted as well. So circular economy is a key instrument in Europe to keep, so to say, the resources within the continent. It is important to look for this, because without a circular economy, we never will succeed to have, for example, a carbon neutral economy. A digital logbook for buildings is developed right now, which is a basis to know where which materials and products are located in the built environment. Last but not least, the levels framework for sustainable buildings is a framework for disclosure of sustainable sustainability information. It's a reporting framework. Without having a common reporting framework, it's not possible to link sustainability indicators in other regulations. And also, it is also a basis for green public procurement. The DGNB system is seen as a global benchmark for sustainability. There are aspired building characteristics defined by the DGNB system, such as low carbon emissions over the full life cycle, but also a minimized use of hazardous substances. For each of these targets, there is a criteria with clearly defined requirements, what to do in which stage of design and building. Resilience to climate change is getting more and more important. So we have included that into the catalog as well. The levels framework, this was the context, is giving the link to reporting. So for the DGNB scheme, it's very important to have this common levels reporting framework included into the catalog. And therefore, the certification scheme is in a kind of pool position to support levels reporting. If we look into this levels framework, of course, not all sustainability indicators are included there, but very important ones like greenhouse gas emission along the building life cycle, resource efficient material life cycle, water use, but also health and comfort indicators here in number 4. But also resilience to and adaptation to climate change and the economic side. Without having the economic side included into the equation, it's getting very, very difficult to succeed on a broad scale. Second part in the EU policy, or the newest element, is the European Green Deal with the taxonomy, renovation wave, and a revision of the EPBD. The EU Green Deal is, Ursula von der Leyen said, it's Europe's man on the moon moment. So it's really starting something new. And it was published in 2019, December 2019, and it claims that Europe will become carbon neutral by 2050. This is a big thing because a lot of things have to be done until then. And so we have intermediate steps in 2030, at least 55% reduction of the carbon emissions compared to 1990 are targeted. But also instruments like a carbon border adjustment mechanism, a draft now is published, are parts of the Green Deal. In the end, the Green Deal wants to mobilize at least 1 trillion of sustainable investments over the next decade, because somebody has to pay for it. And so the best thing is to steer investment in the direction of sustainable investment. So here the the background of the Green Deal is listed again, and you see that the aim is to increase EU's climate ambition until 2050, but also a zero pollution ambition for a toxic-free environment is included in the Green Deal. So it's not only about carbon, and it's not only about financing the transition to a carbon neutral economy. It's also doing it better, doing it in a way where it's good for the people, and to leave no one behind is also to have a transition process, not a revolution, is also included in the Green Deal. But financing the transition is one of the core instruments. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Financing the transition has a certain strategy. First stage is to disclose the externalized cost. So disclosure of is the first element. Secondly, to define what are sustainable investments. Without having this definition, like for sustainable buildings, the DGNB catalog, without having this definition, it's not possible to increase the share of sustainable investment and to put instruments, policy instruments on it. So if we look into this set of regulations and directives, you can see that the taxonomy to define what's sustainable and what's not sustainable from a finance side is a core of these regulations. But also the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation is important because it defines who has to report about what. So companies involved in the finance sector now have to report the share of green or sustainable finance or money they give to sustainable finance. Secondly, the non-financial disclosure regulation is defining who has to report about ESG criteria, and so all bigger companies in Europe now have to report in this direction. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance criteria. So what's included in the taxonomy? The taxonomy has 6 environmental objectives, and here you can find again the criteria from the levels reporting framework. So you see consistency. You see, first of all, climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation as core elements, but also sustainable use and protection of water, a transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and pollution control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystem. So it's about the environment and it's about the climate, which is addressed in the taxonomy. I don't explain now how it works, but in the end, you have to contribute to one of these elements significantly, and for the other 5, there are so-called do no significant harm levels to achieve. If we now look, what does it mean for the EPBD, the Energy Performance Buildings Directive? There will be changes, main changes compared to 2018. So this is from the act, from the new draft, that new buildings will be nearly zero energy building. In the past, now the target will be zero carbon emission. The worst performance buildings are now addressed. It was not the case in the past, so we will get a minimum standard about the performance of buildings where you are allowed to rent it out, for example, which means there will be a high pressure to renovate the worst performing buildings, and planning and information tools will be in place, like the building passport. But now I want to come back to the sustainable construction strategy in Germany. Look, this beautiful building. It's the office building of the Environmental Protection Agency in Dessau. Sustainable construction has a long history. history in Germany. It's more than 20 years ago, the Roundtable for Sustainable Construction was established by the ministry. So it was the idea to have all stakeholders on the table and discuss and to get consensus. What's sustainable construction, and what do we mean by sustainability in the context of construction and building sector? And out of this work, after years, a guideline for sustainable buildings was developed and published. And this guideline is mandatory now for new federal buildings. So the federal government is giving an example how to build, and this is an important signal to the market. The DGNB certification scheme is based on this guideline in line with the findings of the Roundtable for Sustainable Construction. So some principles and methodology behind this is that there's a holistic view. That means environmental, economic, and social and functional qualities have to be included and have to bring into balance. This is important because if we cannot afford sustainable buildings, it won't happen in the width. If it's not good for the people, it won't happen. And if it's not good for the society as well. So this is one of the key pillars of this methodology and principles. But also a life cycle view is in there. It's not about bringing the, shifting the problem from one life cycle stage to another. It's about solving the problem and doing optimization. Everything is based on ISO and SENS standards, which is important to have it comparable to other instruments all over Europe and worldwide. Looking into the DGNB criteria system, you can find these environmental aspects, the economic aspects, and the social aspects are in balance. So with the same weighting, so the width of this pieces of cake is giving the weighting. And of course, several criteria and indicators per quality group are part of such a certification scheme. I won't go in detail, but you see that affordability, adaptability, water saving, climate protection, as well as circular aspects, health aspects, and comfort aspects are included. But where should the data come from to do life cycle assessment? This is always a critical point. In this context, a combination strategy was developed at the Roundtable, a combination between a public generic database, it's called ÖkoBODAT, and EPD's Environmental Product Declaration for specific data. The responsibilities to provide the information about the products, the environmental information for the supply, for all the value chain is on industry side. So who knows better what the company does than the producer himself? But there is a system developed, an EPD system, which is a global instrument. We see it in many countries, and it's operated by the Institute for Bau und Umwelt, so the Institute for Construction and Environment. And they look for consistency, and they look to the third-party verification of the EPDs. The ministry now is the gatekeeper for the inclusion of data sets in the database. So they do a second quality assurance. All EPDs in line with the methodological requirements can come into the ÖkoBODAT, and then which is part of the public database. I will come back to the role of this database later on. Then part of the strategy in Germany is the Climate Change Act from 2021. So we have realized that within 23 years, the CO2 emissions must be reduced to zero, which is very ambitious. So if you see here in this graph, the how the emissions coming down, we have to be faster. Otherwise, we are climate neutral maybe in 2070, not in 2045. That is the aim. And the minister has presented this graph and really told us what are the next steps now. One of these next steps is that subsidies for sustainable buildings in line with the quality mark for sustainable buildings, are given. This funding scheme is now combining the efficiency house, which is a certain performance level for the operation of buildings in line with the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and with the sustainability class, which is including a life cycle approach, are underlying of this quality mark. But beside that, there are also other specific requirements in the quality mark. So it's not only about carbon, it's also about energy use, about use of certified wood, prevention of hazardous substances, very important, design for all, and green roof for office buildings. So to have this additional specific requirements beside the general requirements is bringing the which is necessary to bring the different qualities into balance. The documentation is done via a certification scheme like DGNB, where the specific requirements are documented and checked. It is available for new buildings, for residential offices and educational buildings up to now. It will be included in the renovation schemes coming next year. I want to summarize. The EU Green Deal is Europe's green growth strategy, focusing on carbon and a healthy environment. The Energy Performance Buildings Directive, the Construction Product Regulation, and levels are core directives and regulations for a sustainable built environment. Sustainable finance is key to finance the Green Deal, and in this context, the EU taxonomy is a classification system for all sectors, defining green investment. And also in this context, what's a green building or a sustainable building? Several disclosure regulations are based on the taxonomy. The German Sustainable Construction Strategy builds on a life cycle approach. Instruments, guidelines, and certification and data from EPDs and Ökobau are established. So people know that they are using it in design in the meanwhile. Today, we see incentive systems like Q&G for the life cycle planning. In the future, we will see that as a basis for building regulations. So the new GEG, the Building Energy Law, will include that. I expect that from 2025 on, that you won't get a building permit without looking for the life cycle of the building. Thank you very much. And with the view of this great building, which has a clay wall here, it is 12 meters high, I want to finalize my speech. Thank you for your attention and have a great day.
Thank you to Dr. Crisis, although he's not here with us in person, but we are fully informed of policies and instruments currently being in effect in Europe and in Germany to ensure healthy and sustainable building practices how about Vietnam? How green buildings and sustainable construction are being developed in Vietnam? Let's continue with our next speakers. May I invite Dr. Phan Thu Hằng? May I invite Dr. Phan Thu Hằng? Just some information about Phan Thu Hằng. Phan Thu Hằng is the chair of Vietnam Green Building Council, and she's also an expert from World Bank Vietnam, Director of Sustainable Growth. Hằng plays an essential role in promoting the development of green buildings in Vietnam. She has worked very actively in programs to support the Vietnamese government in its effort to promote a green building. Dr. Hằng, please. Good afternoon, and my thanks to Cass and Hussein and Hamburg University for inviting me to this webinar. I'm very pleased. I'm a alumnus of Hussein, and this means a lot to me. At the moment, I'm the chair of VGBC Vietnam, and also working for Single Bear on building materials, and also work as a leadership coach. The presentation will be about LCA, and for that reason, it will be a bit technical. First, about the World Green Building Council, to which Vietnam is a member. So the WGBC focuses on 3 pillars. So the strategies of WGBC emphasizes climate action, which means reductions of CO2 and greenhouse emission. The second pillar being resource efficiency. This has been mentioned by previous speakers who talk about limited resources and life cycle approach. So the second pillar emphasized the reductions of the use of non-renewable resources and minimizing the use of natural fuel, and at the same time promote healthy living and minimizing the impact of buildings on human lives. So the 3 pillars that you see, climate action, resources, efficiencies, and health and well-being are interconnected. For example, if you minimize carbon emission, you also increase resource efficiency, and by so doing, you will also contribute to health and well-being. In Vietnam, after Vietnam announced the net zero commitment by 2050, Vietnam is pushing for new approaches. And today I will introduce the LCA tool that allowed us to monitor carbon emission and also allowed us to increase resource efficiency. So the WGBC issued the net zero carbon. First, it focuses on operational carbon, why the carbon emitted during the operation of buildings. And in 2018, the WGBC announced a more ambitious plan, which no longer focuses on operational carbon, but also on embodied carbon. So the carbon included in materials in all buildings. If you look at the annual global CO2 emissions, as you can see, the construction accounts for 39% of carbon emission, 28% from operational carbon, and 11% from embodied carbon. So when we aim for net zero, what exactly we aim at? You look at the left side, you see that buildings account for 39% of total emission, and it is projected that by 2050 it will increase even further because we will have double the current floor space. So in order to achieve net zero carbon, so where can we reduce, where can we have the reduction? There are 3 strategies we can do for decarbonization. First, we need to reduce operational carbons. we increase resource efficiency as we operate buildings. So this is the fastest and most economical way for us to reduce carbon emission and increase resource efficiency. We will be able to save 35% of carbon emission from operational activities. And then another strategy is to abandon fossil fuels and to shift to renewable energies, for example, wind and solar power. Vietnam plan to increase the share of renewable power sources to 40%. The final method is to reduce embodied carbon. How can we deal with this? So it means that architects and designers should choose designs and materials with low embodied carbon. And at the moment, material producers, including my company and VNCC, we are in a race to reduce embodied carbon in the materials that we provide. And if we do that, we can reduce the embodied carbon by 80%. And so these three strategy are the three pillars for us to achieve net zero. But before we can do that, we need to be able to measure carbon emission. The previous speaker from Germany say that reporting is the first things we need to do. How can we measure carbon emissions using the LCA as the tool? Let's me give you an example. This is a wall, right? It's typical. So we need to measure the environmental impact of a wall. So no product has no impact whatsoever on environment. All building material has at least some kind of impact. So if we want to measure the impact of this material, how can we do that? How can we measure whether product A is better than product B in terms of environmental impact? So that's where the LCA comes in to measure the environmental impact of a product or a building or a system. I will elaborate later on. So the LCA account for all the inputs. For example, electricity, fuel, chemicals, water, and then it calculates the emissions to the air, to water, and also to soil, and then it identifies the impact. And so we start from the moment inputs are extracted and throughout all processes, distribution, construction, and apply and recycle. And then we get an overview, a comprehensive view of the environmental impact of the product. So this is a definition of LCA. As you know, LCA at the moment is the most common methods to measure environmental impact, and it's based on two standards, ISO 14040 and 14044, which provide common standards for LCA measurements to ensure that we all follow the same standards to allow quality and comparability. So basically, at the moment, there's different labeling system, which may be confusing, but the LCA allowed us to compare buildings and system according to the same standards globally. So LCA follows many steps throughout the life cycle of a building. from cradle to grave, from the beginning to the end. So it starts from the moment raw materials are extracted through manufacturing, installation, use and apply and recycling. And this LCA methods will provide us with a series of quantitative values for comparison. One thing to consider is why we need to consider the full cycle of the product. Sometimes you need to look at, you think you need to look at only one step, but we also, so for example, in terms of production, we want to measure product A. When it is manufactured, it releases less emission than product B. However, if we follow the life cycle, we learn that after distribution, product B will actually produces less emission than product A. So in some product will emit less emission during the production phase. However, it will release more emission during the use phase. So we need to be mindful of that. And this diagram shows the embodied carbon from A1 to A2, A3, which is A1 means extracting materials, A2 transporting to factories, A3 production. So if we focus only on production, we focus only on A3, but we leave the remaining steps, installation, transportation, use and apply. So after the building is demolished, and then other steps such as the potential for recycling. And so we need to measure all the steps from A1 to C4. So throughout this life cycle, you see that apart from the B6 period and B7, which is operational energy use and operational water use, but all the remaining steps, except for B6 and B7, B6 operational energy use and B7 operational water use. But if you look at the remaining steps, they all refer to embodied carbons. And at the moment, we see that the standards in Vietnam often look at only one step. Why, in fact, we need to measure all the steps throughout the life cycle if we really want to achieve net zero. Another principle is we need to have a multi-criteria approach. For example, on the left, a product have impact X, which is less than the impact X of another product. However, in terms of impact Y and impact Z, it actually have more impact. And then in that case, we need to be mindful of impact shifting. So what are the kind of impact that we need to be mindful of when we use the LCA? First, global warming potential, how the product contribute to global warming measured by kilograms CO2 equivalent. Second, abiotic depletion potential. For example, the depletion of fossil fuels and minerals. Eutrophication potential, referring to the impact of over fertilization of soils and water, which leads to excessive algae growth. Another thing to look out for is acidification potential, such as sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxide. And these acidic gases may create acid rain, which have severe impact on forests and river. Another impact may be photochemical ozone creation because of hydrocarbons and VOCs. This kind of impact is colloquially known as summer fog in cities. Another impact is the ozone depletion potential because of emission to air of CFCs and other halocarbons compound often used as solvents. And then we need to look at total primary energy use, measure in megajoule, and the amount of water we require to produce those materials. So these are the key indicators that we will measure using LCA, which give us a total 28 indicator, so as we can measure the environmental impact of a certain product. So depending on product, but not every material has to go through all the 28 indicator measurements, so it depends. So after we run the LCA assessment, we have a document which is EPD, Environmental Product Declaration, which is the document based on LCA results and compliant with the EN 15804 and ISO 14040. The EPD provides us with quantitative measurements of the impact on the environment, for example, carbon footprint, the amount of water consumed, and the amount of waste generation. So using EPD, we can identify the various environmental impact of a product. The good thing is that EPD is verified by an independent third party, very transparent, and it is valid for 3 to 5 years, and it is accessible using a public platform. So what you will find in EPD, normally there are 5 sections. First, general information about the factory, where the product is manufactured. Second, product description. Third, LCD calculation information. So what kind of LCA we use? And then life cycle stage description from A1 to C4 or only A1 to A3. And finally, LCA results as quantitative measurements, which are the most important part in an LCA. So when we compare LCA results, we need to pay attention to the functional unit of the EPD. So whether we are using the same functional unit, for example, 1 kilogram of concrete is different from 1 square meter of concrete walls, or we are using the same set of measurement A1 to A3 or A1 to C4. Who can use LCA and EPD? There are 3 groups: developers or investors, consultants, manufacturers, and policymakers. For developers and consultants, so when we look at the EPD, we can compare and assess to choose the best option that we want in a way that is transparent and consistent. For manufacturer, They can also look at the EPD to design and improve the products towards eco-innovation to reduce the carbon footprint. And for policymakers, we can use EPD to identify whether a product comply with technical regulations such as net zero. So this is an example. So when we provide EPD for developers and consultants, so basically EPD provide environmental impact assessment for building, so we can compare three different types of mattress, flooring, so a flooring material. And if we look at these, we can see that the first option is the one with the lowest carbon footprint. And the next example, to design wood-based and concrete-based with different environmental impact. So if we want to choose the one with the lower environmental impact, the left one is clearly the option to choose. So the LCA is important for developers and consultants because they need to decide the materials right before the building of any construction. Another example, two solutions for wools, insulated dry wool and cement plaster brick wool. So the dry wool release almost 80% less gas compared to cement brick wool, and it also consume 80% less water than the cement brick wool. And according to the Lotus Green Scheme, we also include the criterion on embodied carbon as part of the material category. We encourage the use of materials that use less concrete, and instead we should use non-baked materials and sustainable materials. And this is an overview of the Lotus Green Scheme. For policymakers, they can use LCA and EPD in various ways. They can use EPD to develop a legal corridor and framework and provide a technical guideline towards net zero. This is the net zero readiness framework by the World Green Building Councils, which include 5 categories: government leadership, technical solution, finance, data, and mindset. So the first criteria, as you can see, is government leadership. So for each category, there are specific requirements or standards. You look at goal number 3 of category number 1, government leadership, mandatory regulation on performance requirement relating to achievement of net zero. And in category number 2, technical solution, goal number 4, embodied carbon performance improvement strategy. So when the WGBC conducted surveys to understand the readiness of regional country, so they realized that government leadership is not always ready. So it means that there are not always sufficient regulations in place to ensure net zero. So we propose LCA EPD as an instrument which is highly quantitative and internationally compliant, and it can be used as a universal tool for us to develop building practices towards net zero. So in summary, so I just give you an overview of LCA and EPD. LCA life cycle assessment at the moment, widely recognized methods to assess the environmental impact of a product, a system, or even process. And the EPD, which is the document declaring the impact of a product based on LCA. LCA is multi-stage, multi-criteria using quantitative indicators that are internationally recognized, and EPD will provide transparent information to investors and developers, as well as producer and policymakers will find EPD and LCA a very useful tool to create transparent and clear legal framework. This is my presentation. Should you have any question, please send me in the chat box. Thank you for your attention. My thanks to Dr. Phan Thu Hằng. Very useful presentation with lots of technical knowledge how to use LCA in the world and also in Vietnam. Phan Thu Hằng has 20 years of experiences in building sciences. She has been keen on promoting sustainable solutions for new builds in Vietnam. Now let's continue with the next presentation by Dr. Lê Trung Thành, Professor Lê Trung Thành. Professor Lê Trung Thành is also an alumnus of Husay. He obtains a doctorate from Liverpool University, and at the moment he is the president of Vietnam Institute for Building Materials, or VIBM. He has advised the government to develop the sustainable building material development strategies in Vietnam. Dr. Thành. So allow me to start my presentation on policies regarding a comprehensive life cycle assessment, or LCA, of building materials in Vietnam towards sustainable construction. About building material and sustainable building materials, we know that one important part of developing sustainable material is to conduct the assessment of the materials, and one of the most common tools is the LCA. Building materials, as you know, will have an impact from the moment raw materials are extracted. So from extraction to transportation, from mines to factories, it already consumes energies. So mining building materials, transporting them to factories, always involve the emissions of greenhouse gases, carbon, CO2. And then after that, after raw materials are transferred to factories, they will be manufactured into building materials, and during the production, you know that we will have more greenhouse emission and energy consumption as well. And after production, and then we also need to transport the finished materials to the actual construction sites for installation. And during the use of buildings, we also have to deal with energy consumption and also the matters of emission as well. And until the moment the building reaches the end of its cycle, we need to consider whether we can recycle the materials. As you know, all buildings have a certain lifespan. So again, throughout the entire life cycle, it's kind of a circular cycle. And so the point is, if we know how to do this properly, we will be able to create a circular economy, minimizing the consumption of resources and energies, and at the same time reduce the emission of toxic and environmentally unfriendly substances to the environment. So if you look at the cycle that I mentioned, you see at every single step, we can find the emission of greenhouse gases and carbon. And to do that, we really need policy to regulate all the processes. In Vietnam, if you look at this, Vietnam produces a large amount of building materials every year. So every year, so this is an example from 2020: cement 100 million tons, ceramic tiles 600 million meters, and natural stone tiles 19 million square meters, glass 230 million square meters, lime 5 million tons, burn clay bricks 20 billion units, non-burn products 8 billion units, roofing materials are 500 million square meters, sand, and coarse aggregates 190 million cubic meters, concrete 155 million cubic meters. And according to our estimation, by 2030 and 2025, we will see a consistent increase in the amount of building materials being produced, as Vietnam is still a developing country and currently in a rapid urbanization process. And for that reason, Vietnam, we need more and more building materials. And according to our estimation, we learned the energy consumption of different types of building materials. For example, 1 ton of cement commonly consumes 100 kilowatt per hour electric power and 865,000 kilojoule in heat energy. And we see quite similar substantial energy consumption in the production of other materials. And similarly, during the operations of buildings, we also consume energy, whether it is office buildings or shopping malls or hospitals or school or commercial apartments or blocks. So, for example, maybe an office building or shopping mall consumes 300 kWh per square meter per year. So in that situation, what kind of documents and policies Vietnam has put in place to regulate the production and use of building materials to ensure efficient use of energy, both during production and during use, and how to facilitate the circular approach and LCA. At the moment, the legal system of Vietnam focuses mainly on mining and production, and also the impact of material as they are included in buildings. However, we do not have enough regulation for recycling of materials. So we only focus on mining, production, operation, but not yet on recycling. Recycling of building materials to turn them into building materials perhaps is an issue that requires further policy attention. In this slide, you see some important legal documents and policies currently in place in Vietnam, well, which we can use. For example, the Mineral Law 2010, with a series of sub-laws such as decrees and circular. So the law regulates the use of minerals, including mineral for building materials. Another is the law on energy saving and efficiency, the law on environmental protection 2014. And we have the law on construction 2014 and revised in 2020. So we have a very specific regulation on the extraction and use of minerals for the production of building materials. In addition to those laws, there are also a series of resolutions by the party committee, by the government as well, to issue development strategies. For example, strategies for the development of Vietnam national energy sector by 2045, the national program for energy saving and efficiency, and ministries of construction. There is an action plan of the ministries of construction for energy saving and efficiency. So there is a separate section on building materials, how to improve the quality and how to change the features of building materials to facilitate energy savings and efficiencies. In the construction law amended 2020, Article 110, you see very detailed regulations on building materials. What kind of standards we must follow when we use the building materials, for example, safety, efficiency, and reasonable use of natural resources. There is also a decree number 9 on the management of building materials, which states that the state encourages organizations and individuals to conduct research and develop new technologies in the productions of building materials in the most energy saving and environmental friendly way. And in 2022, there's a decree number 08 detailing the environmental protection law. There are a series of regulations on eco-friendly products and services. For example, the need to develop a labeling tool to ensure that any materials produced are measures in terms of their environmental impact. Another important policy which relates to building materials, both the production and use, is Vietnam's strategies of development of building materials until 2030 and orientation until 2050. This strategy emphasizes that Vietnam will seek to maximize or utilize its very limited natural resources through the effective use of energy, raw materials, and fuels. And there's also the emphasis on green products. And the general goals of the strategy is to develop the industries of building materials production to advance and modern level to produce products that meet international quality standards. And in the strategy, apart from the aims and general goals, there's also quantitative standards. So, for example, when we produce some material, how much consumption is allowed for cement? The heat energy consumption must be reduced to 730 kilocal per kilograms of clinker cement. There are similar standards or threshold for ceramic tiles, sanitary wares, and also glass, both in terms of heat energy consumption and in terms of electricity consumption. The new thresholds are much lower than the current current accepted level at manufacturing facilities in Vietnam, and certainly there will be pressure on manufacturers to comply with the new standards, as I just showed you. And if we can do that, we will really reduce the amount of emission. Regarding the use of building materials in buildings, there is the technical regulation by Ministries of Construction 09 concerning energy efficiency buildings. This is a new legal tool that details the energy efficiency standards for office buildings, hotels, hospitals, schools, and even apartments. So for all of these buildings, there are standards concerning the kind of materials that can be used and that should be used in those buildings. And there are specific indicators, for example, thermal transfer values of wounds or thermal resistant value. So designers and investors must keep those regulations in mind. Another tool being used in Vietnam, and my institute is currently administering the development of this tool, which is the labeling, energy labeling, and green labeling for cement products. This is a very recently issued initiative. We conduct this research for a long time with the project concept with the Hamburg University and other university from Germany as well. We identify the thresholds of key building materials in Vietnam, for example, bricks, concrete, glass that are widely used in civil construction in Vietnam. And so according to the new scheme, all the building materials will have an energy label. So if you look at this, we focus on roofing materials in particular. So I just give you an overview of the policy system and also legal regulations in Vietnam concerning how to promote energy saving reduction of greenhouse and carbon emission. And these policies are important tool for us both to measure the environmental impact of building materials through LCA, and also to put in place new policies to really reduce the environmental effects. Of course, we also need further research to have specific guidelines for each type of building materials, and our institutes are open to cooperation initiatives, particularly with German partners for the extraction, transportation, production, and use of building materials. How can we measure the environmental impact of different materials in each step? And again, thank you for inviting me to this webinar 4. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lê Trung Thành, a very comprehensive overview, an updated overview of policies and legal frameworks in Vietnam concerning LCA of building materials in Vietnam. Once again, we wish to thank all the three speakers for fascinating presentations. Dr. Kreisig, Madam Phan Thu Hằng, and Professor Lê Trung Thành. And now allow me to invite you to the panel discussion, and followed by Q&A discussion as well. First, may I invite Professor Nguyễn Văn Tuấn, Director of CCSB-VN, to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you, Dr. Thuy, for sharing the presentation. And this is the panel discussion, which will be equally fascinating. We will invite our speaker back together with commentators, and we also have some questions already sent to us in the chat box. And we can discuss different issues, for example, green growth, green buildings in the world and in Vietnam. So one of the main question is how to use the LCA effectively in Vietnam, in what kind of applications where LCA can be used. We also have commentators, Mr. Nguyễn Huy Khanh, former director of VNCC, a very famous agencies and consultancy body regarding the use of green materials. So how can we facilitate green buildings in Vietnam? What are the roles of different stakeholders, consultants, users, and manufacturers? How and what they should do in order to promote green buildings and green materials in Vietnam? Professor Tang just mentioned the initiatives on energy labeling for roofing materials and concrete. So one question for you is how the energy labeling may have an impact. And I hope that you can also share your experiences with us as well. Greetings to organizing committee, and my thanks to all the speakers for your presentation, very informative. So I am invited to serve as a commentator, and I represent practitioners in the field of green buildings and green growth. And allow me to have a few comments. As you may know that I have worked as a consultant and designer for 30 years, and I participated in the development of 6 key national construction in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, the key national construction are construction buildings that receive prioritized state funding, but at the same time, they also require adherence to very high technical standards regarding materials and buildings. So for example, the National Convention Centers in Hanoi, the second, the building of the Vietnam's National Assembly, Hanoi Museum, the headquarters of the Ministries of Public Security, and the office of the Laos National Assembly. So I participated during the design and during the monitoring of the construction. And so we had to make difficult choices concerning the building materials that we use, how to balance between the budget, the economic cost, the duration requirements, the technical specifications, and also the environmental impact of the construction. Out of those 6, 5 had a German consultant as the primary consultant. And as a Vietnamese consultant, we advocated for the use of energy efficient and environmental friendly building materials throughout. So first, all the building materials used must be tested carefully for their physical features, and then before actual installation, we always require kind of mock installation to test the quality and features of the materials. Unfortunately, at the time we constructed those buildings, we did not have the LCA tool. And then the LCA tool definitely will be very useful, particularly in the context when Vietnam is trying to comply with promises we made at the COP26. And we consultant, we really need such tool, not just the LCA, but also new tools such as energy labeling. Energy labeling, or LCA, for us is just like price tag in supermarket. Without the label, it would be very difficult for us as designers and architects in order to ensure that the buildings that we construct are compliant with new standards on green growth and green buildings. Another point, next slide. In the current context of Vietnam, I propose a list of 20 most common building materials in Vietnam. In Vietnam, there are of wide varieties of materials, but here I present the 20 most common, most widely used materials. And they are used on both traditional style buildings and also buildings that are designed to be more modern. If you look at this, for example, we have red brick, adobe brick, natural stone, wooden board, polyethylene, terracotta, stainless steel, gypsum, composite concrete, and chemical paint. They are widely used in civil and public construction in Vietnam. And it depends on the style of the buildings, either traditional or modern. So in buildings that are modern oriented, as you can see, we utilize almost all of those building materials except for bamboo. That being said, we users of materials, we do not have sufficient information from the producer regarding energy consumption or the environmental impact of the materials. So we can only based on our personal experiences. We only have a label for Lowy glass. Apart from that, we have no information on energy efficiencies of those materials. Although we try to make a kind of personal assessment of those materials. For example, here, we consider adobe brick to be safe for health and highly recyclable, although not so highly reusable. While red brick, it's more reusable but less recyclable. So as for adobe brick, you can recycle it if you grind it into small particles and remold it into new materials. If you look at this chart, you can see some important material, which is wooden board and glass. So they are the two materials that are both safe for health, at the same time highly recyclable, and they can be used for both traditional style and modern styles buildings. There's some materials that I put open here. The reason I say so, because at the moment we do not have sufficient information to decide whether they are, for example, safe for health, or they are or whether they can be recycled yet. So when the section where I put open is a section where is the materials that we do not have information on whether they are safe for health, for example, chemical paint or water-based paint or composite concrete. So we look forward to labeling system that give us users and developers more information on how to use those materials and whether they are safe or not, or how when we compare between different options. And when I combine the two tables, so out of the 20 building materials, around 10 meet the criteria that we expect. For example, red brick, adobe brick, solid hardwood, wooden board, polyethylene, bamboo, glass, aluminum, stainless steel, and steel. Of those 15, I particularly emphasize solid hardwood and steel, which meet all the three criteria that we mentioned. That being said, if we can use LCA tool on these materials, we can be much clearer about, for example, the environmental impact of each material. It would allow us to have a clearer idea as to how we can achieve zero carbon. Unfortunately, in Vietnam at the moment, we do not have LCA available to us users. So thank you very much for your attention, and let's continue the discussion how we can find the solution for this. My thanks to Mr. Huy Khanh for many practical experiences that he has just shared with us. He has rich experiences in construction in Vietnam. He raises a problem that we need to pay attention to three things concerning the materials we use, health, safety, the potential for reuse, and the potential for recycle. And nowadays, we also need to pay attention to the environmental impact, particularly as we try to facilitate green growth in Vietnam. Thank you for raising for pointing out problems with the use of building materials in Vietnam. For example, the absence of labeling system and LCA information. Now, may I invite Mr. Bruno Fax, Director of Eco-Cycle and Sustainability at CCSB-VN Cement in Vietnam. Mr. Fax.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation. I have a few slides prepared. Some of the slides I will go through rather quickly. Maybe a little bit further, we can go to the first slide.
Vâng, xin ông trình bày quan điểm của ông về các cái FPD.
Yes.
Please present your view. We will look for your view on the EPD and the LCA, building on your actual experiences in Vietnam.
So if you go to the next slide, maybe as an outline of my presentation, and as well to take up a little bit what has been said before from the previous speakers. So first of all, thanks a lot for putting together really an excellent panel and an excellent, speaker list. Very interesting discussion so far. And what I would like to bring in at this stage is just a view from a producer of construction materials for INSI, who is one of the leading producer of cement in the south of Vietnam. So first of all, I think I would like to highlight what Michael Weigel said at the beginning. At the end, we would like to provide a good quality of life for all the people, right? And that means, good quality of life means that we have infrastructure in place. That means that people have a decent house where they can live in. So I think we need construction and building materials. And indeed, the question is on how can we provide this and use it in a more sustainable manner? On our side, and as it has been mentioned as well beforehand, the cement industry has a significant environmental impact. We are fully aware of this. So globally, if you look into the CO2 emissions, we are responsible for approximately 7% of the CO2 emissions. On the other hand, we know as well, if we want to provide good infrastructure, if we want to provide good quality of life, we need these construction materials. And concrete is actually the most used building material worldwide. It's the second most used material overall after water, and it's the most used building material worldwide. And it has some reasons why this is so widely used. Furthermore, I believe, we all aware that climate change is happening and will have further impacts in the future. So I think concrete can as well play a key role in adapting to this. I will explain you a little bit on what we did with regards to LCA EPD, what it is, and why we as INSI actually went down this route. And at the end, I would like to give you some examples on what we are doing to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but as well some other efforts with regards to sustainability. So if you go to the next slide, please, as mentioned, concrete is the most used building material worldwide. This is because I think it's a very robust material. It has a long lifespan. It's quite flexible. You wouldn't believe it, but concrete is quite flexible. You could put it in any form that you actually wish, and it remains there for many years. If you go to the next slides, please. So, overall, I would say as well, if you're talking about numbers, about 3.8 tons of concrete is produced per person per year. So it's a huge amount. And as I said, facing climate change, I believe that concrete can play as well a role in there when it comes to flooding defense. Concrete is fire resistant, etc., etc. So this will play a role, I believe, as well in the future. If you go to the next slide. So here, I think what is important is as well just to look into, what is the footprint, the CO2 footprint per, let's say, per ton of material that we're having in there. If you just look on the concrete side, it's, let's say, comparatively low. However, the problem is, of course, that we are using so much of this material that overall the total greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions of concrete is very high. And I think that is definitely a concern. And as I said, we have to see on what can we do to reduce our environmental footprint to bring this number down. Next slide, please. You mind to go to the next slide? One more. There will be a video. I don't show it here. You can have a look at it. One more slide. Sorry for that. And one more slide. Sorry. The next slide basically shows that we were the first company in the construction, in the cement industry in Southeast Asia. Go back one slide, 7. Yes. That applied EPD, the Environmental Product Declaration. And for us, it was a natural development. Already in 2017, INSI was, part of the green database where we had our products. In 2017, we then went for the green label of the Singapore Green Building Council. For 7 of our products in 2019, we had the green label for all our products. And for us, it was natural to say, okay, what is next? What is the next step? And this is when we started to look into EPD. And since 2021, we have our EPD for all our products in Vietnam. For us, it's important to be transparent, to have as well a kind of a benchmark, because we know that we are having a lot of initiatives that are helping us to reduce our CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. And we would like to communicate this to the end users, to the architects, etc., so that they can compare, if they use our product, if they use the product from our competitor, what is, the difference, what is the impact. So in our EPD, what you see here on slide 75, we are basically covering the phases from A1 to A4. And this EPD is publicly available, so you can go on the website, you can find it, and you will find all the information of INSI Vietnam, about the company, production process, and then obviously as well all the metrics linked to our products. The next slide, please. Slide 76 in that case. So we are having a lot of efforts that we are doing to provide, let's say, a healthier environment. First of all, we are working very rigorously on green manufacturing. So whatever we can optimize, we will try to optimize. Interestingly, for example, beforehand, we have heard about the energy and electricity consumption per ton of cement. I can say, based on the figures that we see here on the industry level, we are actually quite lower because of all the initiatives that we are having in there. As an example, we have waste heat recovery installed in our cement plant. That means about 25% of the electrical energy demand from our plant is covered by this waste heat recovery. In the middle, you see our EcoCycle business waste management that we are offering. This helps us to solve 2 problems. One problem is that a lot of waste today is not managed properly and is going into landfill, and as such pollutes the environment and leads to methane emissions, etc., etc. So we are taking these wastes and we are producing an alternative fuel out of this waste, which is then replacing coal at our site. And this is the second big advantage of our business, EcoCycle business, that we can reduce the use of fossil fuels. And last but not least, what you see here is we are working as well very diligently on our portfolio, on our product portfolio. So we are using blended cements. All of our products are blended cements with lowest clinker factor in the industry. We are as well developing new building materials, so-called light building materials. For example, Conwood is one of these products that we are bringing into the market to make sure that the end user, the architects, they have a choice between the different products, and they can choose a greener or less, a product with less environmental impact. On the next slide, you basically see, next slide, please. This is the waste materials that we are using over the years. You see in 2010, we used about 50,000 tons of waste materials that we are taking out from nature, and we provide and prohibit that it goes into landfills. And today we are about 150,000 tons. So we basically, tripled our capacity in there. On the next slide, you basically see what is the impact on our CO2 emissions. And this is the CO2 emissions over the last 25 years, approximately, or 20 years. So you see from 1998, when we started to produce clinker and cement here in Vietnam, it went down quite drastically until 2020 because we invested a lot into green manufacturing, product portfolio, etc., etc. And of course, the journey doesn't end there. We would like to further reduce our environmental footprint. The last slide, next slide, is just to give you a little bit perspective. So climate and energy and CO2 greenhouse gas emissions are obviously very important to us as a player in the cement industry, but we have as well some other pillars in our sustainability ambition 2030. So we have to look into circular economy. What can we do in terms of waste-derived fuels, increased use of byproducts, but then as well biodiversity in water, very important. And I think this is as well one of the aspects to a healthy environment is, that we have a thriving biodiversity. So very important. We have many actions there as well, and targets. We want to be net positive by 2030 on our biodiversity aspect. And we have a lot of initiatives to reduce water consumption and as well to increase the surface water usage. And all of this we have to do together with the community, together with the stakeholders, with authorities, with NGOs, etc., to make this happen. And last but not least, occupational health and safety is really our foundation for INSEE. We have to take care of our employees, of our contractors, of our community where we operate. So very important. We basically have a zero harm objective and ambition for health and safety. So that was very quickly to give you a little bit of input on our company and why we went into EPD and what are the different initiatives and activities we have to reduce our environmental. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno from INSEE. Fascinating sharings of experiences in a particular field, which is the production of concrete. As Bruno say, it's perhaps the most common building materials in the world right now. So the extensive use of concrete require attention because of the potential impact, for example, CO2 emission. So our priority is to reduce the environmental impact of concrete production as well as other building materials. And Bruno provides a series of measures that have been put in place by INSEE's lots of improvements and innovations through all phases of the production process. And he provides evidence, very optimistic evidence that INSEE managed to reduce the emission by more than 50%, and also managed to convert lots of waste into actual fuel, reducing landfilling and also increasing energy efficiency. And he also highlighted the importance of EPD, which gives the company a clearer idea where to intervene and with a reliable tool in order to identify how to reduce emission. One issue in Vietnam is that what kind of challenges that we may encounter in order to obtain the EPD, right? How can we encourage producers in Vietnam to go for EPD? Because going for EPD basically means that to become more transparent. Another question is, so after we have EPD, what kind of positive or benefits that EPD can provide to businesses? So some question for you.
So maybe I start first with the challenges that we are facing. So I mean, to do an LCA and EPD in particular obviously needs a lot of data. It needs very strict data collection. And we were in a lucky situation that this has always been already in the center of INSEE, because we have to report our emissions, for example, our resource usage, etc. anyway on a yearly basis. So we were lucky that we could actually tap into existing data that is out there. But I have to say it's still quite an effort to put this data together in the form that is needed for the EPD and in the form that it can be verified by the external consultant. So I would say it's an effort that is needed. So that's, I would say, is the challenge. On the other hand, there is definitely a benefit. And you mentioned it already, it really increases the transparency and it gives the end user or an architect or a developer, a tool to differentiate and to choose what is, the right product for his or her application. And just to give you an example, I think everybody here is aware of the new factory that Lego is about to build. And here the carbon neutral factory. And, we have been obviously submitted our documents as well and have been, kind of approved that our products, are transparent. They know what is the impact on the environment, etc. thanks to this EPD. And so I think this gives us, I would say, a competitive advantage for these kind of projects. However, what is as well clear that, these kind of projects are still relatively low in numbers in Vietnam. So this is not the big market there where we can really differentiate ourselves. So I would hope that in the future there may be as well regulatory framework or more of a demand from developers, architects, and users to go for transparent, EPD certified products. And by the way, I think it's important to mention the EPD at the end just brings in more transparency. It doesn't mean that the product who has EPD has a lower environmental impact, right? But I think, the companies that are going for EPD, I think they're quite confident about the products and they're quite confident about the initiatives that they took in order to reduce their environmental footprint and to have a sustainable, competitive product in the market.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for excellent and spot-on answers, very concise, but you really offered us a very useful solution. And I know and I agree that in order to use EPD and also in order to utilize the information from EPD, we need a lot more efforts and investment. EPD give us an information where to improve. Regarding LCA, as a tool to evaluate the environmental impact, we also need to see from different perspectives. For example, producers often try to meet the highest demands. However, they also need to consider the economic cost of compliance. So, for example, whether improving the energy efficiency may actually result in profits, whether a more environmentally friendly product will be more profitable, will bring the enterprise more profit as well. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. It's a challenging question regarding how to balance between green growth and actually corporate benefits. So in the Q&A now we have some time for Q&A. So actually, Madam Phan Thu Hằng already responds to many questions raised to us in the chat box. And then perhaps I want to bring some questions to the front. First, I have a question for the organizing committee. In Vietnam, INSEE is one of the leading company that's received the EPD together with Nippon Paints. But in Vietnam at the moment, as far as I know, there's only 3 enterprises that have received EPD. But how about smaller companies? What is the advice that you have for smaller corporation? The cost, the pros and cons. And furthermore, if a small enterprises want to go for EPD, and then what kind of data sources that they can use? So for example, if they don't have any data, where the data will come from the government, etc. So can you share with us your knowledge in this matter? Thank you, Dr. Tuấn. I have responded to lots of questions sent to me in the chat box. So basically, this is not a certificate. This is just a document to show us where we are. It doesn't mean that when you have an EPD, it means that you are more environmentally friendly, etc. So the EPD just tells you what is the current stage of your materials. It doesn't mean that your product is better than my product. Let's say 2 companies produce cement. The company with an EPD is the company that is more informed of the environmental impact of their products, and the company that is more transparent regarding the impact. It doesn't mean the products of that company is necessarily more environmentally friendly than others. I mentioned that EPD is beneficial to 2 stakeholders. First, the producers. EPD is just like you are a person going for a medical test. The EPD tells you what kind of environmental impact your products are releasing into the environment. For example, the clay, the bricks that you're using. The second APD tells you which part in the production phase, extraction, production, or transportation, is releasing more emission or consuming more energy. So if you realize that you are actually consuming more energy than you should do, and then you need to take action to control that. At the same time, EPD is also useful for consultants and investors. Let's say you are an architect and you want to know the total carbon emission of a building you are designing throughout the entire life cycle of the building, and then which material contain the largest amount of carbon. For example, concrete, cement, and steel. So if we want to minimize the embodied carbon and operational carbon footprint of that building, you need to consider the kind of materials that you will use in order to minimize the embodied carbon. So if you have all the EPD available to you, you will be able to make that decision as well. About the question regarding where the EPD data come from. This is a global set of data. I share with you some website or all EPD in the world. The data for those EPD come from global libraries that you can access in Vietnam. Major producers such as INSEE, Singapore, and Nippon, they all have EPD and LCA. This is the global trend. So you ask that in Vietnam, how many buildings have used LCD? All buildings are in compliance with Green Mart, for example, in Singapore. So they require LCA for the building level. So there are two levels of product, but also the level of building. So they have to go from A1 to C4 in order to qualify for LEED and Green Mark. So those are certificates are quite common in Vietnam. And you ask any architect that provide consultancy in green growth, they will know. And there's some service provider who provide the service of life cycle carbon analysis for an entire building. And they will be able to provide you with an estimate from very early from the phase of design. They will allow you to choose the design with the lowest carbon emission. Of course, not just carbon, right? But there are other parameters, but carbon is the most common. So such service providers allowed us to choose the best concept designs, the one with the lowest carbon emission. There are lots of simulation software that are also widely available. At the moment, there's some free LCA courses. If you're interested, you may apply to those programs. So how can we encourage small enterprises to go for LCA and EPD? So if LCA is verified by a third party, it's quite costly. But there's another option, which is a self-verification. There's some online service that allows you to conduct a self-variation as long as you can provide input data. For example, to produce glass, you have to know where the raw materials come from, the environmental footprint of that product. And during your production, you need data regarding the electricity, water, and other inputs that you use in installation, operation, recycling until the end of cycle. Those tools will use those data inputs to generate an LCA. Of course, I understand it's quite complicated, but as you know, this is a very comprehensive tool allowing you to look at the entire life cycle of a product. So certainly you will need very precise and sufficient data. As you know, we often say rubbish in, then rubbish out. If we have bad input data, we won't be able to produce decent LCA results. You need data from A1 to A5, then to B, which is operation, and C, which is end of life period. And so the producer need the data for all of these phases. If you have reliable and sufficient data, it won't be too difficult. Thank you very much. Very spot on, hands-on advice, which Madam Hằng has accumulated through her rich experiences working in Vietnam. So LCA is applied not just on carbon, as Madam Hằng mentions. She used the example of carbon because it is the most common indicator. There are other indicators, for example, acidification or global warming. So for each of these, you will have different LCA. For example, during concrete manufacture, and then it releases CO2, but if we measure other kind of impact, it may be less than other kind of materials. And as you have learned, LCA can be flexibly adapted. So some LCA runs from A1 to A3, but some runs from A1 to C4. Another question is that so when we run an LCA, we need to provide data on essential manufacturing phase. Sometimes you may have to reveal some kind of production secrets. So I want to assure you, companies won't have to reveal their kind of technological secret. You only need to provide certain sets of data. You are right that LCA does not only analyze an assessment on CO2, it applies on other indicators as well. And so, for example, you want to analyze a certain indicator, you only show the data regarding that particular indicator solely. You don't need to reveal your entire production process and the kind of technological secrets. So there's some question already sent to us on the chat box. One question. May I invite Dr. Lâm to ask the question in person? Please go ahead. First, I wish to thank all the speakers for your presentation. I thank the organizing committee. I just asked a question in the chat box and Madam Hằng just respond. There's one thing that I'm interested in. You mentioned sufficient data. So I want to emphasize that the data for LCA are not publicly available data only, but some kind of data specific to that company. So, for example, for regarding a producer, they can cover the A steps, but they won't be able to access the B phases, which is operation, and also the C, which is recycling. So I'm wondering how a producer can compute the LCA for the entire life cycle of a product. So how can we access the data for the B and the C phases? Thank you, Dr. Lam. Madam Hằng, can you respond to the question? Thank you for the question. This is a practical question. So in the B phase operation, producer normally do not have sufficient data. But depending on your product, you may not need to acquire the information. So regarding cement,
ý tôi nói là có một số những cái sản phẩm mà
so there's some products, for example, brick and cement, concrete. So for the B phase, those products have minimal impact in the B phase. And when we compute the impact, we ascribe the value of 0 to the B. Because as you see, those materials require minimal maintenance. So in that case, we can assume that the B phase impact will be 0. However, for example, refrigerator or econ, we certainly require data during the use phase. In contrast, concrete and cement, normally we can safely ascribe the value of 0 for the B phase. For the end of life cycle period, maybe it's another thing the producer must pay attention to. They must understand after the user finish using the material, where the material will go, whether it will be reused or recycled. Thank you, Madam Hằng. There's some question by some lecturer from Husay, and I hope that Dr. Hằng has responded to your question in the chat box. There's some question regarding comparability. One question about green buildings in Vietnam. I'm sorry, the sounds from the room, it's very muzzled. I cannot hear the question. About green buildings in Vietnam. So it seems that Vietnam has been slightly slow compared to other countries in terms of development of green buildings. At the moment in Vietnam, there's only
200 grill buildings with 6 million square meters of floor space in Vietnam. Quite modest. I work in this field for a long time. I serve as board member and now the chair of Green Building Council of Vietnam. And one of the problems that I mentioned, not just in Vietnam, which is the legal framework. We need a clear framework to develop green buildings in Vietnam. There are many criteria or standards: H by FC, Lotus by Vietnam, Green Mat by Singapore, but none has been officially recognized as the institutional standards, either for sanction or incentive. For example, what kind of buildings that will be provided with a subsidy for green growth. So for example, if we have such a regulation in place, then investor will know that they will have some certain incentive, for example, potential subsidies in order to build green buildings. So I hope next month Ministry of Construction will organize Green Buildings Week, and then perhaps we will get the necessary legal framework that we have wished for. I think it's high time for a decision at the high level to be made. As you see, construction account for 40% of total carbon emission. So if we go for net zero carbon, construction has to be the primary focus. In order to do that, we need very clear guideline and direction. I agree with your question. You asked why there has been so few green buildings in Vietnam. My thanks to Madam Hằng for the questions, for the answers. Certainly, we always face challenges and opportunities as we seek to promote green buildings. There's another question. The use of kind of composite materials. And then many people argue for kind of natural materials, the materials that require minimal energies to produce, and they are also more environmentally friendly. So the question is whether we should promote the use of those natural materials in our construction today. So the question for Bruno is that what do you think of this idea in Vietnam, and for example, the shift from the kind of composite materials such as concrete to more natural materials? And we really thank you for and your company for the support that you have given to our students. For example, the competition for green initiatives in Vietnam. We really love those platforms at our university. We often gather students from different background: engineer, designs, architects, and building materials. So we are wondering whether at your company, do you have any kind of similar initiatives, any initiative to develop new materials that are suitable to Vietnamese condition and natural?
So thanks a lot for the question, and thanks a lot for pointing out towards the INSEE prize, which we are organizing every year, and it's the 14th year that we are doing this this year, where we are basically trying to work together with students, universities to find, solutions for a more sustainable construction. We definitely believe that we cannot do this on our own. We definitely believe that we need the innovative potential from universities, from architects, etc., to work towards this together. Now, the question you have whether we should move more towards, let's say, natural resources. Again, I think LCA probably would be the right tool to answer this question, because initially you might say, well, natural resources, they are there, they can regrow, etc. So why not using this? However, again, we would have to really look at the total life cycle, and as well to see, how much of these materials we actually need. And is there enough supply, I would say, let's say, from the natural resources? I think why concrete is so popular today is because, it's relatively cheap, and maybe it's too cheap, to be very honest. If you would put in all these externalities, etc., the price would probably go up. But you see in more developed countries, like regions like Europe, North America, where we have a price on CO2, obviously, this has an impact as well on the cost of concrete and cement. And I think this is just integrating, let's say, the externalities that we're having in there. But at the end, it's still relatively cheap. It's available in big amounts. You can form it. It's resistant. It's fire resistant. It's there for the next 100 years. So it's quite a challenge to find a comparable building material at this stage. I don't say there's nothing like this out there, but I think it's really a challenge to scale this up and to replace, let's say, concrete as the construction material in the short to mid term. Hopefully, long term, we will find materials which lower environmental impact. But again, I think before jumping into conclusions, I think it would be wise to apply an LCA approach as well for these, let's say, new or natural building materials.
My thanks to Mr. Bruno for the excellent comment. So we always dream to, to have kind of traditional style houses, houses made from unbaked clay, roof from thatch roof or straw. And sometimes we see kind of similar trend in current buildings in some resorts, etc. But at the same time, as Bruno rightly points out, the use of a kind of natural materials in Vietnamese context needs to be carefully thought out. So the A impact may be less, but the B and C impact may be actually higher. So nowadays, we need to consider the balanced solution, and that is the kind of problems we need to deal with before we can really find more advanced materials that can address all the problems we are facing. On this occasion, I also want to thank Madam Chu Hằng and other colleagues for sharing your experiences with us. Certainly, there will be more questions because this topic is relevant to almost everyone. Policy makers, consultants, developers, and architects in Vietnam is still new to this field. Unfortunately, the time is limited. we will send you the slides and also the question and answers that we have gathered for your further reflection. And if you want to pursue a more kind of specific or in-depth discussion, we slightly exceed the time, but I'm pleased to see we have more than 200 people staying with us until now. Once again, we wish to thank all the speakers and commentators. So now back to Thủy for wrapping up before we conclude the webinar. My thanks to anh Tuấn and all the experts and commentators and participants. We have a really fascinating discussion, and I know the time is up, but I'm reluctant to stop anh Tuấn to wrap up this webinar in more than 2 hours. We listened to 3 presentations by 3 experts, and then we have the commentation by 2 other experts. So in total, we learned a lot useful information and knowledge concerning sustainable building materials that are health oriented. We in particular discuss issue of LCA and EPD. Allow me not to repeat the points that have been discussed. We will prepare all the documents and recordings of the webinar and made it available to you on our portal. Once again, we, the organizing committee, who say the HOPE project from Hamburg University and from the KAS, we wish to sincerely thank all the experts and commentators. We thank the support from KAS and Madam Vũ Thu Phương. We thank Dr. Michael Weibel, Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Professor Nguyễn Văn Tuấn, Phạm Hải Hà, Nguyễn Thị Khánh Phương, and Tố Linh, and the team for preparing this webinar. We thank Department of International Cooperation and relevant Department of HUSE. We also want to thank service provider from Winley and the interpreter. And we thank all of you for your participation. We wish to express our sincere gratitude, in particular to press agency in ASUI and Vũ Thị Thu Phương from Vietnam Energy Network and Kiến Việt Corp for sharing the information about this webinar on public platforms. This is the final webinar of the HOPE project this year, but we will come back very soon next year. Next year there will be more activities to come, and we thank you for your time and participation, and we look forward to receive your support in the next year in order to facilitate health and sustainable building practices and green urban governance in Vietnam. Governance is the top priority for us. We sincerely thank all of you We would wish you good health and success, and we hope for your further contribution to the process of sustainable construction and green growth in Vietnam. Thank you very much.